On June 5, 2006, 3 maintenance workers were killed and a 4th was seriously injured in a violent explosion during a welding operation at a rural oil production field in Raleigh, Mississippi. The field was operated by Partridge Raleigh, a company that specializes in recovering oil from older, dormant wells. All the victims worked for Stringer's Oilfield Services, an independent contractor hired by Partridge Raleigh to install tanks and piping at the site. The CSB investigated and issued a case study calling for safer work practices in the oil and gas production sector, which has experienced a number of serious accidents.
Our case study noted that the fatality rate within the oil and gas extraction sector was more than 8 times higher than the average of all industries in the United States.
Well, we've been very concerned about safety in the oil fields for many years. In fact, this is the 4th case in which there have been multiple fatalities that the CSB has investigated.
CSB lead investigator Johnny Banks says there are key lessons from the Partridge Raleigh investigation that apply to many industries, particularly concerning what is called hot work, such as welding, cutting, and grinding that can cause ignition.
Workers should use extreme caution when performing hot work on any tank or container that holds or has held flammable materials. Their lives may depend on it.
The following animation shows how unsafe work practices and a lack of training led to a tragic loss of life at the Partridge Raleigh oil field. The oil field had 4 tanks. 1 was for wastewater, 2 were storage tanks that held oil prior to sale, and a 4th larger tank, a so-called production tank, received oil from the well. A Stringer's Oilfield Services crew arrived and began work to connect a pipe between the large production tank and the nearest storage tank. To prepare for welding, contract workers removed the hatch from the large production tank to clean and air it out. They then checked for remaining flammable hydrocarbons in the tank by using an unsafe and unreliable technique, inserting a lit oxyacetylene torch to check for a flash from ignition. The big tank was in fact empty, but crude oil remained inside one of the storage tanks, warming under the morning sun. Unseen by the workers, flammable vapor from the crude oil was flowing from that tank into the other storage tank through an overflow line, and then out into the atmosphere through an uncapped 3-inch pipe. This open pipe end was just 4 feet away from where they planned to weld. In order to provide a platform for the welder, a ladder was placed horizontally between the 2 tanks. To stabilize the ladder, 2 workers stood on top of one end. A foreman observed the work from atop the production tank. The welder, who was perched on the ladder but wore a safety harness secured to the tank, began by making 2 small welds to a pipe fitting. Sparks showered from the welding process, igniting the flammable vapor that was escaping from the open pipe end. Flames flashed back through the open pipe into the storage tank, causing an explosion which blew off the tank lid and the ladder that 3 of the workers were standing on. Flames shot through the overflow pipe into the next tank, causing an even more violent explosion from the flammable hydrocarbons inside and blowing its lid off as well. The first tank lid flew a distance of 50 feet. The other traveled 750 feet through the air.
2 workers that were standing atop tank number 3 and 1 that was standing atop tank number 4 were blown off by the force of the explosion. They suffered fatal injuries as a result.
Only the welder, who had been wearing a safety harness, survived, but he suffered a broken hip and ankle. The CSB investigation identified several unsafe work practices that contributed to the likelihood or severity of this accident. Prior to welding, workers only tested for the presence of hydrocarbons by inserting a lit acetylene torch into the production tank.
Not only is this dangerous, but it's not a good way to check for flammable vapors.
The workers did not use a flammable gas detector to test for vapor, which could have warned them that dangerous vapor was flowing out of the open pipe near where they planned to perform welding. Another unsafe practice was not capping the open pipe, especially important since all the tanks were interconnected. and one contained a significant amount of crude oil.
This case is a reminder that we need to look at hazards in the area around where we're working, that equipment that may be nearby that isn't directly involved in the job that you're doing, such as welding, can have deadly consequences if you don't address the hazards.
The CSB report also noted that the use of a makeshift work platform, the ladder braced by workers standing on top of the storage tank, unnecessarily put these two men in harm's way. They died when they fell from the exploding tank. The American Petroleum Institute, the National Fire Protection Association, and other organizations provide guidelines for safely performing hot work. Safe practices include issuing written hot work permits, ensuring work is performed only by trained personnel who understand the hazards, isolating areas where hot work will be performed from piping or tanks that contain flammable or combustible liquids by installing caps, blinds, or other physical devices, and using a gas detector to test for a flammable atmosphere before and during work.
Oilfield work can be extremely hazardous, and that's why training and procedures to do jobs such as hot work and welding are absolutely essential to avoid tragedies like the one in Mississippi.
The CSB found that neither Partridge Raleigh nor its contractor, Stringer's Oilfield Services, followed OSHA requirements for burning and welding operations. The accident could have been prevented if these OSHA regulations had been followed. Although OSHA implemented a special emphasis program to inspect oil fields in several other key states, in the 5 years preceding the Partridge Raleigh accident, OSHA did not conduct any planned inspections of the more than 1,000 oil fields in Mississippi.
Based on the findings of the investigation, the CSB issued several recommendations.
In addition to specific recommendations to Partridge Raleigh and Stringer's, the CSB recommended OSHA's area office in Mississippi implement a local emphasis program to inspect oil and gas production companies. And the CSB recommended that the Mississippi State Oil and Gas Board, a regulatory agency, establish a program to identify and report unsafe oil field conditions to OSHA.
Accidents like this need not take place if companies follow regulations and safe work practices.
For more information on the Partridge Raleigh accident, please visit our website at csb.gov.